Good morning, everyone. If you can hear us, just type in the chat box and let us know that you can hear us fine. And again, that will also be the way to ask questions throughout today's presentation. My name is Dennis Evans. I'm with the Department's Office of Communications and Outreach. Thanks for being online this morning. This morning we're going to talk about USAS coding and expenditure standards. With me today I have Eric Bodie and Londa Schwerking from the Office of Quality School Choice and Funding. We also have Barbara Shaner with the Ohio Association of School Business Officials here with us this morning. Your phones are muted, so again, you will use the chat box for the questions, and we will answer questions kind of as we go through the sections. I guess we'll go ahead and get started this morning, and with that, here is Barbara to say a few words.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to say welcome to all of you, and I'm glad that you're on board with getting this important information. I'm here just on behalf of OASBO just to kind of say that we appreciate the working relationship that we've had with ODE on this issue in particular. Eric Bodie and Londa, who are going to be giving you all of the technical details. I am not the expert that you need to hear from today. But we all had worked together in a work group setting. Many of our members have been involved in this process when the Expenditure Standards requirement came out in law that required ODE and the Board of Education to look at this. Eric and others went out and met with different people in the field to kind of get feedback, and we had two of our committees that met with Eric and gave him quite a bit of feedback about things that they liked or didn't like or would appreciate as far as what they ended up recommending to the state board. And so the state board then adopted the standards. There then was a work group then put together that included some OASBO members that went through the whole process of figuring out how things needed to be coded and what changes needed to be made to the USAS coding manual. So we appreciate that kind of input, the opportunity to give feedback, and so we are pleased now to have Eric and Londa giving you the details of what you need to do, because it's going to be a short turnaround time, and we're kind of bound by things that happened in the legislative process, and so that's what has brought us here today. So with that, I'm just going to turn the mic over to Eric, who will begin the discussion about what information you need today.
Thanks so much, Barbara. It's been a pleasure for us, too, working with OASBO and the different treasurers. We've had a good collaboration here. I've certainly learned a lot in this whole process. And, you know, that we had a lot of comments over the couple years that we've been developing this. I think the final product that we had to make a lot of decisions. It's not really what any single person would have ended up with. You know, a lot of the things were kind of compromises, and we had to fit into the law. It's not what I would have had exactly if I, you know, ruled the world, but I think it's a good product, and again, I'm just really thankful for all the participation we've had. So we're going to walk through this presentation today. We have an hour and a half. Just a reminder here, I'm going to be doing some of the beginning and the end, and Londa Schwerking is going to do the middle part. We will be taking questions. We have Sonia Hunter here, who's with our Quality School Choice and Funding office, and she'll be helping us with the questions as well. And the three of us, you know, are available for follow-up afterwards with emails, etc. I do want to remind you just a couple things here that we, we have the slideshow. If you go to our website and just type in expenditure rankings, you will get to the place. There's a home page for the rankings that has a number of documents, including this PowerPoint presentation. So if you want to print it off, it's there. and some of the crosswalks that we'll be talking about later on, the expenditure standards themselves. That's a place you can find it. Also, I saw a couple comments about being able to hear. You have to be online for the computer as well as dialed into the voicemail, or to the voice part through your phone. All right, so let's go to the first slide here. This is what what we're going to talk about. I'll just briefly go through kind of the history. Barbara gave you a little bit about it. I'm sorry, can you go back? The history. We'll talk about the categories. That is, all this, the different expenditures allow us to group things together in categories, which we've been doing in the past, but we'll do more of, and in a somewhat new way. So we'll walk you through that. That requires some coding changes, and that's kind of the meat of it, with the USAS changes that Londa's going to talk about. We'll get to the crosswalk of how some of the documents that we have available that you can see the changes, or how your coding decisions then affect which category spending ends up in. And then this important at the last, the next steps. We'll talk about what you need to do, some of the products and timelines that ODE has to have available, and again, kind of what that means for things that, from your standpoint, from the treasurer's standpoint, what that looks like. So a lot of important information there at the end with the next steps. So briefly, history. We started out with the budget bill 2 years ago. We're going through the budget bill process now with the biennial budget, just as we did 2 years ago, and included in there was a new section of code, a couple new sections of code that had us, the Department of Education, develop expenditure standards, and from that we would do rankings of school districts based on some of that information. And also part of that is categorizing like districts together. So, for instance, small community schools will be compared with small community schools, and large traditional districts against large traditional districts, that kind of thing. So we've been following that, those guidelines. One of the changes in law, this has been a 2-year process, and I think we've had 4 bills now that alter this law, which has kind of been interesting as we've gone through and tried to, do our thing and get to where we are here, because the direction keeps getting changed a bit. Not unusual for other things with Department of Education and education law in Ohio. But one of the things that was changed after the original budget bill was this alignment to the U.S. Department of Education reporting. So it's kind of odd, but in the past, what's happened is that we have gotten year-end all this data on, fund, function, object, all the spending of school districts, and we've taken all that information and, parsed it and added it together and everything, and produced these reports like the expenditure flow model and the benchmark report. And then we've started over. We took the exact same data and applied some different rules and different ways of categorizing things, and then did this report on the federal side to the mandated reporting that we have to the U.S. Census Bureau, and then they take that and they compare Ohio and to all the other states, and you can look up online and see that. And so one of the directions we have here is to bring the two together, so that as much as possible, the categories, the decisions, the classifying things will be done similarly. And so in the end, when we have a report for each school district, that'll essentially add up to all the total that we'll have for Ohio that we report on the federal side. So there'll be alignment between the two. All right, let's go to the next slide. So a big key piece that happened was in December 2012, after we had done a lot of this back and forth and good communication that Barbara had talked about. We actually had the State Board of Education approve the Expenditure Standards, which is a 2-page kind of overview, high-level document. And then we had a lot of work to do to get specifics of code-by-code object by object, all that we worked on, and then here we are in April and May of 2013, where we're doing the rollout and the communication to school districts. So, categories. So this is the old categories that you were probably used to if you've ever looked at your expenditure flow model report, where based on all the data that all the schools turn in, we take that data, and the first thing we do is we exclude a whole bunch of things. And one kind of feature of the way that we have been doing it is that those exclusions we just kind of throw out. So there's no reporting on them. So things, for instance, capital spending that is excluded from the EFM categories, there's no way that you can look up anywhere on our website, or we don't have reports or anything comparing capital for all school districts. So if you're not in one of these 5 categories, you don't exist. So we have these 5 categories that we've been reporting on for a while: instructional, pupil support and staff support, instructional staff support, administrative, and building support. So in the new system, it's not so much different, but there are some differences. There are 3 big categories. So this is by the law that we're implementing, and it talks about the high-level things. That it says, first of all, identify everything that's a current expense. And so there are a number of things that are excluded from that. Most importantly, anything that's not current, so capital and debt service and that kind of thing, but there are a number of other categories. And so everything that is a current expense of the district is divided into one of the categories, either classroom instructional or non-classroom. And those are the terms that are in law, classroom instructional versus non-classroom. So, what does that mean? Of course, we've had, sounds so simple, right? A lot of discussion over the last couple of years about what's in those 2 categories. And here's where we ended up, that there are 3 things that roll up to that classroom instructional category. That includes your pure instruction, your pupil support services, and your instructional staff support services. So, again, all those 3 sound pretty familiar to what we have had in the past with EFM. It's not just kind of the pure instruction, but other things that support pupils, students or teaching in the classroom. So instruction, pupil support, and instructional staff all are included in that classroom instructional. Then in non-classroom, there's more of a breakdown than there has been in the past. This, again, follows the federal categories, and so some of these are kind of small, but they here are the 6 categories. There is general administration and school administration. Currently we just have admin. Again, with the federal, they break it down into general versus school level. There's also operation and maintenance of plant and pupil transportation. In the past, with the EFM, the pupil transportation has been rolled up into that building support, but it gets its own category. And then there is your classic other support services category, and then also food service. So those 6 items all roll up into non-classroom. And then you have a number of categories that we will report on. There'll be numbers for all these that you can see for your district. You'll be able to look on our website and other places to see totals for all these and building by or district by district. But for our big calculations that we'll do, classroom, non-classroom, each of these categories in the green end up being excluded from the calculations. So there's a laundry list here, and let me run through them. There is enterprise operations. So enterprise are kind of things like businesses where you take in money and you spend money out of that. For instance, a career tech program might have something like that. There's also this what's called elementary, secondary, non-instructional other, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Community services, so things like school districts spending money, but it's really not for the pupils in the classroom. It might be something for the community, supporting adults or anything else. swimming pool, things like that. There's also a category for adult education. For the whole classroom, non-classroom, we're talking about kids up through 12th grade. So if it's adult ed beyond 12th grade, it's in this separate category that ends up being excluded. We have a non-elementary secondary program other category. We have construction, and a couple different categories under that you might call capital. So there's a construction category, there's a land and existing structures separate category, there's an instructional equipment and other equipment category. There's also payments to other governments and interest on debt. So all those things roll up into that excluded category. So how do we get there, right? So we have, we have to end up with all those. And so everything, that you code, fund, function, object, will allow us to figure out how we roll up into these different categories. Now let me just preface before I turn this over to Londa to say that most of what we need for this we already are getting from you. So, USAS manual, we're not talking about an overhaul. We're not talking about a totally different process. Just as you do your own coding and follow the manual, you'll do in the future. And most of USAS manual, 95+% probably of what you code will be the same. But there are some changes here that mostly around the alignment with the federal, how they do definitions, we realized that we had to make some of these changes. So really what Londa's going to do is walk you through some of those changes and some of the differences in the USAS coding that we worked on with the Auditor of State's office, and they're doing their final vetting and their final kind of editing to actually get these into the updated USAS manual. So I'm going to turn this over to Londa.
Good morning. We get to do my favorite topic, which is coding. The first category we're going to talk about is technology, the 2900s. The USAS manual's been around since 1977, and when it was written that nothing would change. And for the most part, most of our categories haven't changed. However, in the late 70s, we got a VT box terminal, and we were hooked into an old, what we used to call A-sites, which is now your ITC site, and we thought we were going to be hooked in there forever. So the 2900s were written so that all the charges for your OECN services through your A-site would work. And that was nice back then, but we all agree that technology has come a long way since then, and no one ever anticipated these changes. So the problem is that now everybody is using these technology codes for different things, and we need to align ourselves up with these national standards. So if you look on the first flow chart that you see in front of you on administration and then students, the administrators have been coded 2960 and are going to remain coded 2960. And then we have moved and clarified, I guess you'd say, the students' work. So if you look at the next screen, you will see right out of your USAS manual the technology codes. However, we have defined them further by saying that it is really mainly for administration and supervision of technology and all those things associated with it. And we are going to have one code there for that technology, that 2960, and we are getting rid of all the other OECN codes because they're really not needed. When you get your bill from the ITC, you break that bill down. I know you do because it's what we all do. So you charge the fiscal to 2500s, the info high to 2200s, your DASL to 2100s, and so you break that all down. And so it's really important that you continue to do that, but it also says we don't need all those 2900 codes. So the administration is going to be that. And then if you go to the next slide down under the coding, under the 1000s, that reflects what's on the right hand of your screen under the student services. We have added a line to instruction that says technology used by students in the classroom or which has a student instruction focus would be code 1000. So anything you do directly with instruction needs to be coded 1000 as we have reflected in that flow chart. The next thing over is, well, what do you do about the person that runs a computer lab or the software we buy from a vendor for one of those intervention programs? What do we do with that? We are adding a code called 2240, which will be instruction-related technology services. And it will include internal technology support, which means your technology guys that go out in your classroom and work with the teacher and get stuff set up and load the software and do all those things, as well as external vendors, as well as someone who runs computer labs, and anything else along that line. And we have made it technology. You'll notice there's a line up there, 2225, which is computer-assisted instruction. Number one, that was not well defined. And number two, it just talked about computers. We don't know where the technology world is going to lead us next. And so we are going to be broad-based in this line. And any support service that was related to technology will come out of this code. So the only thing you should have left coming out of your 2960 should be your direct administration for technology. Now, you can define that as to however you want. You may have a person that spends half time doing administration and half time student support, which means you'd split the salary between 2960 and 2240, but you would need to define what is happening in your district in technology and then code it appropriately. All right, next category is going to be special education. And special education kind of is, it changes all the time. Special education never stays the same. You hear the different categories all the time. You hear the different placement options that kids are placed in all the time. Your teachers are doing one thing one day, and now we have cross-categorical and some other things, and it's very difficult to keep up with it. And sometimes you look at those codes and you just take all your teachers out of 1239 for K6 and 1249 for 712 because it's easy. But we are going to allow you, if you look at that flow chart where it has the K6, 712, do you want to track it by handicap? If you do not want to track it by handicap, we are going to list that asterisk under 1230 and 1240 so that you can code all your teachers to 1230 and all your teachers to 1240 and not have to delineate them down. Excuse me. The federal government says that we have to break all special education expenses down by K6, 712. So that on your screen you see the K6 and you say all of the different categories that are under there for identification purposes. That's nice, but you don't have to code their salaries to that. The federal government only wants the delineation K6, 712. So you will be able to code all of your teachers to 1230 and 1240. As I said, we're going to remove that asterisk. And so that should help you that you do not have to worry and struggle over where you have to take that from. And that will help ease our categories for the crosswalk also. Okay, on the right-hand column, you have the support services. And this is where we had to make some changes because we have a lot of codes out there, and the federal government really only wants to see K6, 712. So we did take the biggest cost item you have under your support services, which is OTPT. And so we have it broken down as to how you are going to code those expenses. So under 2181, OTPT K6 is going to have everything in there related to OTPT. 2182 will be 712 OTPT, and all associations with that, which includes your CODAs, your PTAs, all those types of expenses. Then, because there was not a large expense in any one of those line items that we saw across the board for any of those other codes, we have consolidated all support services. Anything other than OTPT, you are going to put in 2183 for K6 and 2184 for 712. It's really important that you understand your adapted PE, interpreter service, a guide service, a reader for your visually impaired, the interpreter for your hearing handicapped, mobility specialist, all those things, anything else that's a support service for special ed that you pay out for your children is going to be in 2183 or 2184. We are trying to simplify things for you. Now, I understand that a lot of you track items for your SF6s, but you need to track them like sticking that bill in the child's folder or something to help you track them otherwise, unless you want to create a job number out there for it. But other than that, this should simplify your life just a little bit better.
Londa, I did want to make, as this has been confusing, I think, a little bit to people in our previous presentation, the other 2100 support services don't change. So, for instance, 2130 health services, 2140 psych services, right. 2150 speech pathology and audiology, all those stay the same, and the way you've been coding in the past, you can probably continue. So when right. Londa's talking about other services that go into that 2183 and 84, those right. are ones that would fit within the support services.
These are mainly
disabilities.
These are mainly unless you employ an OTPT, which is why we allowed for that separate code. Most of the other services you contract for in these small amounts. But yes, the 2150 is still your speech pathologist, 2140 your psych, and the 2130 is your nursing and those type of services. Exactly.
Okay, Londa, before we move on, we have one question. What about speech therapy, which is a large cost similar to OT right. and PT?
Right, and speech pathology is still going to stay in the 2150s. Your psychologist service will still stay in the 2140s. Nursing will still be 2134. None of those services are changing. These are the ones that you used to code to the 2180s that are smaller services, mainly services you contracted out for. But knowing that a lot of districts hire their own OTPT, that was the other reason we thought separating that out would be a good thing. But the rest of the services are services with adapted PE and a mobility specialist that are usually smaller cost. We all know that speech and psychology are big, big costs to our districts. So, okay? Next section will be educational aids. One of the things we really seriously looked at is under the national codes, everything to do with instructions in instruction, including all of your classroom aids, whether they're a parapro, an attendant aid, no matter what type of aid they are in the classroom. In the national standards, they are all in the 1000s. And so we seriously looked at that and said, why do we have them in the 2200s? Because they are not support to the teacher. They're really supports to the students. So we are going to, if the aid assists the teacher with instruction, you're going to code them to the 1000s. You need to move all those 2214, 2215, and 2216s over. Now, your special education aids that are 2215s and 16s, you need to make sure that you move them over to a 1200, a 1230, or a 1240, but you need to make sure you do that. If they are only there to assist a teacher with instructional and don't work with the students, then they're going to be in 2200s. We are keeping 2200s because 2200s are mainly function for staff training. And so if you look under the coding that you see in front of you, you still have improvement instruction and staff training and all that, but we are moving all those aides that work directly doing instruction, we are moving them all to the 1000s. Now, you'll see under there that 2216 has a 2180 code. That is incorrect. If you look at our PowerPoint that's on our website, it has been corrected to say that you will use 1230 or 1240, just like the 2215. The 2217, which is supplemental, is usually used under summer school or an after-school program or some type of other supplemental instruction, a tutoring program, and you can use those under 1930. If it's a special needs program like that, then you are going to move it to a 1230 or 1240. However, if you look here under instruction, one of the other things we did change was it was referencing OATs and OGTs, and since those are gone and we have a new testing, we reverted back and said, you know what, it's going to be any state-mandated testing, and then we don't have to change it anymore and worry about it. So the importance of making sure that classroom aids are coded to instruction, and if they are not, then we will not, you'll leave them where they are.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions on that?
A couple questions here. First of all, in this regard, what about library aids?
Library aids are still going to be coded to 2222, just as they always should have been.
And then going back to the previous set of slides, what if we contract out for OTPT services through the ESD? Will we need to get the breakdown from the ESD by K6 and 712?
Yes, you should. Yes, you should. Absolutely.
We talked and coordinated here with the Office of Exceptional Children about these potential coding changes that we were looking at, and their message to us was that they were really concerned about that K6 and 712 definition more than anything. They didn't need all the breakdown, so they're very much on board with the changes we're making here. I do want to say, though, that we've had this question, I think it came up here too, that there are some times when it's not easy to delineate that K6 and 712. So, for instance, if you have someone that supports middle school students and they do 6, 7, and 8, and one possibility for the treasurer is that if you know how much of the time that person supports 6th graders versus 7 and 8th graders, then you can make that distinction and break down the cost. But Office of Exceptional Children told us that kind of the majority rule is okay. So if you have someone like that and it's really very difficult to break out, and you say, well, most of their time or 70% of their time or whatever is spent on the 7th and 8th graders, then that person can just be coded 712, and that's acceptable.
Yeah, we were also told that if you have a middle school, and the middle school curriculum follows the high school concept more than an elementary concept, then you just keep the 6th graders in with the 712 on the cost, because that simplifies things. It fits with the standard of what they're doing. You would only pull that if the curriculum for the 6th graders was following an elementary curriculum separate from the middle school concept.
Okay, Wanda, just one point of clarification. If we already break our codes down to 4 digits, can we keep them that way, or do we have to go back to the 1230, 1240 level?
No, the 1230, 1240s you will still be allowed to use the codes you want to use. However, in the 2180s, you need to move to OTPT and then other services. But under the direct instruction, if you want to leave those all broken down into the 1230 codes and 1240, you can do that. There were just a lot of concerns, and we were trying to simplify it so that if you wanted to just put all your teachers out of 1230 or all of them out of 1240, it would be fine. We're just giving you an option of making your life a little simpler.
Okay. And just to be clear, where would an adaptive PE teacher be coded?
Adaptive PE is going to be under all the other services, depending on whether they're K6, 7, 12.
I think, if it really is PE, and so if it is, which is part of instruction, that could be coded as a 1,000 type expense.
Well, adaptive PE is specialized to the special education needs of special education, and right there under the coding, it states under 2183 that adaptive PE will follow K6, 2183, and 2184 would be for 712. And it's in that coding that I just had the slide up. It's right there, and that would follow in line with that. So,
just wanted to say, I saw there was a question there about when coding changes take place. We will talk about that at the end of the presentation and next steps. So we're not ignoring that question. Just be a little patient with us.
Okay. All right. So we're ready for shared services. We have been with the governor and everyone promoting shared services. A lot of school districts were a little apprehensive of doing shared services because of driving their cost per pupil way up and not having any avenue to exclude those costs that could have a detrimental effect on their cost per pupil. So we talked about what could we do to help that out. And we talked about different funds, but we have to deal with GASB and all of those type of things. So the auditor's office came up with a function code that we could use for doing shared services. Now, that being said, you have to qualify yourself as to what you have are purchase services versus provided services. So your purchase services are what you're going to purchase from your ESC, that's a form of shared service, or any other district that you might work with that is a purchase service that is not a provided service where you're adding your cost up. So your ESC, what you have to remember to do is a lot of you now have your ESC deductions from your foundation, and there's no delineation on that bill how much of that's instruction or support services. And so you need to make sure that you get that the treasurer's able to get from the ESC a breakdown of all their contracted services so you can charge off for all your kids that are in an ED unit that they are providing instruction for, that you can do that as an ED contract service. And so you need to make sure that you have those all charged to the proper accounts and not just charge them off all as an ESC charge, because that would not be pertinent to, you would lose all those instructional costs that you need to charge off. So make sure that you are charging your ESC charges off correctly. And then on the right-hand side, the provided service, the state auditor's office has come up with a function code of 3400 that will be excluded from all the reports. Now, the purchase services is some of it's going to be instruction, some is going to be administrative, but the shared service will be all excluded. So they have come up with all of these codes. So if your district is providing services to another district and you have these costs, then you can put them in this code, and this will exclude them from your cost, because they're not your teachers, they're not your support staff, they are not yours, and so you want to exclude them from everything you're counting. And so they did a nice detail on all the services that they believe that you could be providing shared services for.
And I think just on this coding, it's whatever level of coding that you want. And so if it's kind of fairly simple and you only have one thing, you could just use 3400. If you want to be more specific, you can get down into those 3410 or 30, as specific as you want.
Sure, absolutely. All right, so we have a scenario here that would be pertinent to using that. If your school district sponsors a community school, and because of negotiated contract and those type of issues that you have, you are providing all of the teachers for that community school. And so you are paying all of them. You build a community school, they send you a check back. But all those expenses are out of your accounts. So you will now, and in some cases, some schools, it's like close to $500,000. So what you would do is you're going to charge you will be charging all of these expenses to the $3,400 instead of charging them to the $1,000 and $2,000, because that will not inflate your expenses then. And they'll just be excluded. So you can feel free to put all of those costs there, receipt the money in from the community school, and not have to worry about those codes. The second scenario is a scenario that you probably wouldn't move it into, because you've just added 2 buses to your fleet. You've contracted with the neighboring district's mechanic to do that, so you formed a shared service agreement so that we're now servicing both districts' buses in one compound, and then the district just bills back the other district for the services. The only additional cost, you were going to hire that mechanic anyhow, so the only additional costs are the services and the supplies for that other one, and you're going to bill that back. It probably will not be that big of an expense that it's going to affect your cost per pupil. So that's probably one that is a small one. Same as I heard another district that they buy salt. They both buy salt. One district pays for it, and then all of them pay them back. That's probably not a large expense that you're going to worry about putting in the $3,400. It's just not going to affect your per pupil cost that much. But the nice thing is to know that you have this option if you are approached about doing a shared service, and it will save you money and save everybody money. It's nice to know that you now have a code that you'll be able to move all that to. Okay, are there any questions, or we'll move on to shared service or to extracurriculars? Okay, extracurriculars. All right, the 200 funds are excluded. The 200 funds are all funds that the money's raised by the kids, for their activities. It's their money. We don't have to worry about it. Done. So, therefore, it should be excluded. And your other funds, such as your 001, 018, 300, they are a little different. That is money like your 018, you get picture money in, you get Pepsi machine money in, or Coke. And 300s, you have gate receipts, you have choir concerts and band concerts, and so you have other money coming in than just student money. And so therefore, if it is in a 4,500 like athletics, it will be excluded, because athletics are going to be excluded. Now, that being said, I want to qualify the fact that if you now have an agreement that your students are going to receive physical education credit for doing their 2 sports seasons, and you want to take some of that coach's salary and count it towards that instruction, then you need to split that coach's salary up between instruction and the 300 fund, because the 4,500s will be excluded. So it's a local decision. It's however your district has your policy, but you need to make sure you follow your policy and that you charge the athletic coaches where they belong. Okay, under the other 4,000s, some of the other 4,000s that might fit classroom instruction would be your band and choir, where they are also getting credit for doing marching band and those type of things. So the other 4,000 functions are going to count with the classroom instruction. But that's what you have to be careful of. If any of them are classroom instruction, they should be in a 300, not a 200 fund, or they won't be counted. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. So, the support service direction codes, the ones that end in 1, the function codes that end in 1, where it says it is a supervisor, a director, 2131, 20, yeah,
2161.
I'm thinking of 2211s is what I'm thinking, I guess. But if you look down through your USAS manual, and you will see the asterisk that says requires OPU, those are people that are supervisors. And so maybe they're not direct administration like in a 2400, but they're a supervisor. and I know you know who those are, they're still going to require an OPU. We have added 2953 for statistical record services for recording district and administration records. Now, I'm not sure where you put your EMIS person. You could put them in 2100s or 2200s or 2900s, depending, again, it's a local decision. You have to look at where your person falls in the scheme of things. Are they administrator or are they more a support service? And so you need to put them where they are. What you have to remember, excuse me, is the 2900s are counted in administration, which will be excluded from instruction.
Yeah, there's a 2125 that's currently called record maintenance services, but really it's under guidance. It's really meant to be student records.
Right.
And so I think we're actually updating that to call that student record maintenance services. And so if you have record services that are not student related and they really are more admin, like records for your bus or your lawn mowing or whatever it is.
Those records you're going to keep in 2700 or 2800.
That's right.
Really, you really are. But student records would be DASL, anything to do with DASL, progress book, those type of things would be in that 2100 category.
Yeah, 2125.
2125, those would fit in there. So, we also, throughout this, throughout the USAS manual, we get it. There are some small terminology updates, just like we updated OGT, OAT. We cleaned up some of the wording and some stuff. This is not going to be our last update to the USAS manual. Tracy McCreary, that's working with us, is looking at other things that in the future we will be trying to clean and update things to the USAS manual. And then we have to talk about equipment, because you noticed in some of those flow charts we have 640 equipment as not counting, as being eliminated. And Eric has an update for us on that.
Yeah, and this is one area here that we've wrestled with a lot. The federal government kind of has what I think is a little bit odd treatment, where it singles out equipment as kind of an object code definition that is different than all the other functions. But they're very specific about large, capitalized type equipment that needs to be broken out and essentially counted as capital instead of an operating expense, which is fine. So we've gone back and forth on this, and we actually need to update some of our documents here. In fact, everything that we have online now is still, it's 99% right, but it's still draft, and this is part of the 1% that we have to change. So here's the deal with equipment. That, currently under 640, most people, in fact, the vast majority of dollars spent is just coded as 640. But there are two specialized subcategories there. One is 645 technical equipment, and 647, I believe it is, capitalized equipment. And we will use that distinction. Kind of there's a lot of different breakdowns to say, treasurer by treasurer. Do I count something as supplies? Do I count it as equipment? Is it capitalized equipment? What's the difference there? And there is no one definition. And it's not that we're hiding it from you. It's that, on the federal side, they are not really clear. There's sort of this, multitude of things that you can look at to say, is it something that is, has a useful life of over 5 years? Is it something that you repair and not just replace? Is it something that costs over a certain threshold, whether that's $1,000 or $5,000 or something else? And, some of those different distinctions. So certainly one test that we would encourage people is to say, if it's something that's big enough to be on your capital asset list, and so for your reporting purposes, you're reporting it as an asset, then it should be capitalized equipment. And that capitalized equipment, the 647, that is what we are going to roll up to capital, and it will not be included in, in classroom versus non-classroom, because that's just for operating stuff. But if it's a smaller equipment or supply, you can still use a supply code, or you can use a 640, not 647, but just a 640 code, and that would be sort of small equipment that would not be capitalized. So anyway, we'll update our documents. I know that's kind of a lengthy explanation, but it is one that we have had a lot of back and forth on.
Okay, before we move on to the crosswalk, a few more questions about coding. First, where would the principal secretaries be coded? How would they be coded?
They're still going to be coded to 2421, just like they always have.
Okay.
That will not change.
All right. We share an EMIS coordinator through our ITC. Do we charge that as a shared service?
No, you are contracting with your ITC for that person. And I believe the ITC is probably billing you for that. So that is going to be a contract service. So you are going to be putting that in whatever function you deem that person to be, whether they're a support service or an administrator, under a 413, I think, object code, somewhere around in there, for contracting statistical type services.
Yeah, the shared services, and just to reiterate what Londa said, those codes would only be used if you are providing a service to somebody else. So if, for instance, if you had an EMIS coordinator that you were paying and they were on your staff, but you were then, that person, part of their job would be to do the EMIS coordination for your neighbor's district, and your neighbor's district was paying you for that, then you would code part of the salary of that person as a shared service. But, beyond that, if it's someone that you're getting billed for, or it's someone on your staff, you would not have to designate anything as shared service. I do want to mention one other thing that we hadn't talked about before. If there are any ESC treasurers out there, ESCs should not use these shared service codes, because everything they do is a shared service. And so we're not trying to radicalize and, have them code everything as a 3400. So if you're an ESC treasurer, ignore the 3400 codes.
Okay. Which functions would be used for community school and John Peterson scholarships deducted from the foundation settlement?
Okay, those are going to be charge-offs, and those are still under the 470 to 479 object code with tuition. And tuition, if you look on the big crosswalk, or the big sheet, what do we call this? The big one to the crosswalk sheet, okay. Under step 2, it says that those object codes are excluded because we don't want them double counted. The district that's providing the services is counting that as their instruction, and so therefore you won't. And so anything to do with tuition is going to be an excluded expense because we don't want them double counted.
Okay. Wanda, does this mean that the 640 object code will be included in the classroom instruction based on the function?
I believe that that's how that's going to appear, although we have to change the crosswalk report now to get that to work. But it sounds like 645 is going to be the only thing that will be excluded then.
Yeah, the capitalized equipment object
645 code will be excluded and the rest will be. I think it's 645.
Oh, did I
believe.
get that wrong?
Maybe not. Maybe I don't have
I thought
it
it
right.
was 647, but I could be wrong. Let me just look that up quick here. It is...
Probably me.
You're right, 645. I got it wrong. 645 is capitalized equipment, so that would be excluded, but anything 640 would be counted.
Right.
Now, if it's 640 and then you have a function code with that, and the function code was a instruction,
right,
it would count then as instructional.
If you bought iPads and charged them to your 2421 640, it isn't going to count towards instruction because you put it in your administration code. So if you bought a bunch of little iPads, and that seems to be the biggest concern of everybody, is that the small iPads that aren't a huge expense, but they're an expense and they want to make sure they're tracked with equipment, then as long as you code them to an instructional code, any type of 1000 code, they're going to be counted with instruction. But just be wary, again, of what functions you use, because that's going to determine what gets counted with instruction and what doesn't.
Okay, in the USAS manual, 2160 is listed as a function for student desks and chairs and things like that. and in your presentation it has been eliminated. Where would those items now be coded?
That's the instructional enhancement.
Yeah, it is. Instructional enhancement.
Yeah. I mean, if it's something that is for instruction, for students in the classroom, and whether that is, any code, any object code, whether it's a teacher's salary, or it's, supplies, or it's, really any code, it doesn't matter. But if it's for instruction, and that's kind of one of the big, themes here that the federal government has been telling us, and, you read their instructions, it's, if it's instructional, count it as instruction, as a function.
So therefore, desk and chairs are going to be out of the 1,000 categories. If it's a speech pathologist desk and chair, then it's going to be coded to the 2150s. So coded to the appropriate function from where the person that is using the equipment, where their costs are.
Okay, another one. Within the 300 funds, can the cost of the marching band instructor be split between instruction and extracurricular?
Well, that's a district decision. The district has to decide how they do that. I will tell you, most districts I know, the band instructor comes out of an 1130 function code, including their supplemental for the band. I don't have too many districts that I know where they're paying the supplemental out of a 300 fund.
Okay. How would we code contracted services for special schools for our students, such as Citadel and Eagle Wings?
Do you know what Citadel or Eagle Wings are?
The special schools?
Generally, if you have a cost, and it is your student, so it's not a community school, it is not, auxiliary funds or something like that, but if it's your student that you're counting as one of your students in EMIS, but you contract a special service, whether it's through the ESC or through, anybody else, then you would code that appropriately.
Well, I think you also have to be very careful that if they're providing all the instruction and you're not giving them the information to do that, is that a tuition issue instead of contracting a service? If you contract a service and they are only instructing them a part of the day, you're providing the instructional materials and maybe the tutor or anything like that, then you would show it as a contract service. However, if they're providing all of the instruction and they're not using your school materials or any of your stuff, then it's the same as a tuition charge, and then that would be excluded.
Okay, going back to the desk and chair scenario, would the desk and chairs purchased as part of an OSFC new building project be excluded?
Typically, yes. I mean, things that, with a capital project, large capital project, things that are part of that whole process paid out of the capital funds, you would typically just code as part of your capital project.
And could you quickly give us an example of coding for community school expense?
I'm trying to interpret what that is.
Yeah, because I'm not sure how they're showing that now. If, depending on a community school expense, that's kind of broad-based. So if you are, if they're giving you a bill, the community schools, if they're giving you a bill and it shows they've instructed a student, then it's going to be like a tuition charge. I'm confused about what that entails, because it could be anything. It could be a tuition charge. If it's a management company, then you're going to take the charge out of management administration.
Okay, we're asking for more detail on that one, but in the meantime, can you give us an example of capital versus operating equipment?
Sure. Well, I should mention that earlier. One other change that we need to make on our crosswalks here and all that is vehicles. So whether it's a school bus, and I think those are 650 and 660, those are equipment, and those would count as capitalized they would roll up as an excluded category.
Right.
They would not be included in the classroom or non-classroom. So the example of capital versus operating, I think the biggest thing to me would be if it's tracked as an asset for your financial reporting, and everyone has a threshold, and we know those vary, and the federal government and others don't have a single threshold, and when we talk to the auditor of state, they don't want to give a specific dollar threshold, so it's going to be up to you. But say your school district might have a policy where anything above $5,000 as a single item purchase has to be included as a capital asset for your financial reporting and tracked that way. That would definitely be a capitalized equipment, and you should use the 645 for that.
Okay, I think the rest of our questions will be addressed as we go further into the presentation, so let's move on.
Crosswalk. All right, this is back to me now. There are two different crosswalks, two tools really that are, again, on our website right now as draft, and we'll have a couple of updates to give, and we'll send those out when we do. But the two that I want to walk you through, the first one is this one-pager, and I think you can't read this on your screen probably, so you might want to print this out, but this is what it looks like, and I love this one because it's close to my heart. One comment that we got over and over when we went through this whole development process in the last 2 years was treasurers saying, you do your EFM report, and that's great, but it's confusing. I'm a treasurer, I do all my coding, and I turn it in at the end of the year, and then I get back this report, and I don't know how things have rolled up. And I've tried to read the USAS manual, the EFM manual to explain, what counts in what category, and it's still just confusing. And I will tell you, it was confusing to those of us here at ODE as well. So one thing that we've tried to do with all this is get out of that black box mentality and try and make it as transparent as possible. So, you see all those flow charts that Londa walked you through. We wanted to make it as obvious as possible. If you make this choice in coding, here is where your expense will end up. And this sheet gets to that as kind of the one-page, highest level view that you should be able to look at this and try and figure out anything that you code, you'll know where that will end up counting. So it's a little confusing. Let me walk you through it. This is meant to be read left to right, and you'll see at the top there it has step 1 through step 7. And it's almost the way to think about this is as if you were writing a computer program. And in fact, our data manager, in writing the computer program to do all these categorizations for the per pupil amounts, he did this. So this is following, the logic, step 1 through 7. So picture yourself, you got, end of year report, and you got your whole universe of expenses. Everything, fund, function, object combinations, you got everything that you've coded for the whole year. Okay, so first step is you exclude certain things. And really the true exclusions are only things that are kind of accounting things that if you didn't exclude them, you would end up as double counting. So things like rotary funds or internal service funds that, or transfers, things that are certain, just really shouldn't count anywhere, or things that that you pay out or that go through your books but really are on behalf of somebody else's students. So some of those funds, like the rotary type funds, you'll see are excluded. Step 2 is exclusions by object. So again, the 470 to 479, those are tuition type things. These are, community school payments or auxiliary payments, so things that go really aren't benefiting your students but benefiting somebody else's students. And then some of the 7,000 function codes, which again kind of get to that accounting type stuff that you don't want to double count. So all those things are just thrown out and excluded totally. Okay, so now you get to step 4. And step 4 says there are certain things that, because of the fund that you put them in, that you can just know exactly how they're coded. A good example of this is adult ed. So if you have something in Fund 12 or Fund 413, there's a little list there, those are by definition adult expenditures, adult ed. And so it really doesn't matter what object or function, we know that that has got to be an adult ed. So if you code something to those funds, and there's only a few listed there, those will automatically be put into that category. The enterprise operations, that's one that we talked about with like the shared service. So there are a couple funds there, like Fund 11, that if you code it that way, it will, with that fund, it'll automatically come over and be an enterprise operation, which is like similar to a shared service. Okay, so then you get to step 5. There's the only thing that for all this, that where the object code matters, is this equipment. So any other object code, it doesn't matter for this, what category you end up in, except this is the only one to focus on, that 645 or 650 or 660 will be the 3 that if you have those, they end up being included as capital equipment rather than anything else. And then step 6 is really the heart of the matter. So if you've gotten that far, if in your whole universe of expenses something hasn't already been excluded or automatically characterized as one of these categories, then we get to where most things will end up being classified, which is by function. And so you see there, for instance, if it's, anything 2300 to 2419, that'll end up being counted as general administration. So you run through there, you'll see, for instance, all the 3400s. 3400s, if you code it that way, it'll automatically come into that enterprise operations category, which is one of those green, non-operating excluded categories. So again, you'll be able to see it. It's not like it drops off the face of the earth. At the end of the year, you'll get a report, and there'll be this data for all school districts on our website. But for this big calculation that we have to do for per pupil officially by the law, that'll end up being excluded. And then the last thing is that there are a few that have to be classified by OPU. So this gets to those direction, and kind of the thinking here is that there are certain people, and this, if you're a small district, you may not even have this. It's more probably for bigger districts. But if you have in some of your support areas administrative people, so they're really not directly working with kids. They're really more administration. They're really more supervisors. Those people would be counted in the direction category, so something like the 2121, 2131, and so those should be counted as admin. But then are they school admin or are they general admin? That's where we look to the OPU, and then we would break it out. So it's not a big distinction there, whether your things count as general admin versus school admin, but to do that breakdown, we will have to use the OPU. So that's really it. Everything, any expense that you have, any combination fund function object, you should be able to look at this sheet and see where it ends up.
Okay, one question about this chart. Looking at step, looking at step 5, and according to this chart, everything with a 640 object code would be excluded. Does that mean even instruction would be excluded?
No. This is one place where this has to be updated. This is, and we will change that. So that should say anything, what it will say when we update it is anything that's 645, 650, or 660 will end up being classified that way and end up being down there under equipment instructional or equipment other. All right, I want to move on to the next crosswalk, which we're bringing up here on the screen. So, if you're like me and you're a treasurer and, you're a numbers person, you think, well, USAS, that's a PDF Word document. That's kind of helpful, but, I'm a spreadsheet person. I want a spreadsheet. So this meets your inner need here. This is USAS codes on the spreadsheet, and it really is the function codes. And it's a lot of information in this one. This is actually just page 1 of 8. So the whole thing here lists a separate row for every single one of the function codes. And let me just tell you how you read this. I'm not going to go through all these because it's a different way of a resource guide for you to know all the stuff that we've already gone over. How you look at this. So on the left-hand side, you have those white, black, and gray categories. And the distinction there is anything in black is a header, and so you can't actually use that code. Like you can't actually code things to 1,000. You have to have a further breakdown. So that's what the black is. White are codes that you can use, and then gray are codes that are optional. So if you want to break down into the gray, you can, but you don't have to. So that's the black, white, and gray. Next to that, there's the column that has the blue and yellow and green. This is the column that shows you all the changes that we're making now to the USAS manual. So if it is something that just stays the same as we had before from the latest current version, then there's nothing here. But if it's a new code, or we are changing the definition slightly, or we are eliminating a code or anything else, that's where you'll see something there. So it's kind of a handy reference for that. And I should mention, again, this too, we need to, it's 99% correct, but we'll update that. I'm sorry, could you go back for a second? So then the next column over, there's a set of columns that then this will tell you it's sort of the same information but presented a different way that we had on the last crosswalk. You can look and find all these function codes where they end up in which category. And it's all color-coded, and it kind of matches the other crosswalk. So anything that's kind of in that blue-purple range is one of those that's going to end up being counted as classroom instructional. So either as a strict classroom or a pupil support or a staff support. If it's anything in that kind of orange to red range, that's something that's going to roll up to be an included category but count as non-classroom. So if it's, the admin or what have you. And then anything in that green range is something that will end up being excluded. So, kind of easy, just look at any function code there and you can see where that ends up being.
And the far left column, those codes are right from the USAS manual. So the USAS manual was copied, and then you have the changes, then you have the national descriptions, and like Eric says on that far right, that matches that big crosswalk sheet so that you can coordinate that. It's really a cool report if you really look at it, because it takes you from where you are now to where you will be. And that's easy to see.
All right, a couple questions here. For the included funds, will we be able to have access to the data that was excluded? This will help us to identify our total spending on a per pupil basis.
Yes, you'll be able to have a breakdown of all those 20 or so categories. So it's not just, the big classroom versus non-classroom, but all 20 or so of those categories, you'll be able to see your spending level for each of those.
Okay, and for support services, will a nurse for the entire district now have to have an OPU for each building they serve?
No, they're still coded 2134. So you never have had to have them under a separate OPU. So unless you're coding them on 2131, but I thought I remembered that 2134 is your nurse code. Hang on. Yep. 2134 is nursing services. So it does not end in a 1, so you do not have to have it as an OPU. So as long as you use 2134, you're fine.
Okay. We lease classroom equipment. How do we code that?
You're going to code it under the 1000s, and you're going to show it as like a 425, I believe, for contract service or for maintenance for some kind of service agreements. 423, no, not 423, that's repair. I want to say 425, something like that. Mm-hmm.
All right. I do want to skip ahead here because I do want to get to the next steps piece, and this may answer some of the questions. I want to maybe just, go to let you know what's coming up here. We've had some questions on this. So there's a couple of things that you'll need to do as treasurers. One of the things is just absorb all this. So, you've heard all this, and what you'll need to do is sort of understand it and then think about all your coding. And if there are things that we're telling you that, maybe it relates to coding changes that are in the USAS manual, or there could be other things that aren't changes, but you're just rethinking and saying, maybe I haven't been coding that right, or there's a different option all along. So just think about all your coding and do the updates there. And, obviously we're providing these tools with you so you can, one of your goals here, or, one of the implications of the coding is where it ends up being counted, and so that's a factor you may want to consider. So we are working with the state software development team in updating the state software to reflect all these codes. And it is not available yet, but it will be. If you want to, and this is a treasurer decision, you can ignore all this for this fiscal year. So if this is something that you just say, I want to finish out the year coding the way I've been coding, I don't want to, I'll just do that, and I'm going to implement this change next fiscal year, you can do that. That is fine. There are some treasurers, though, who have said, there are these new codes, and I may want to recharacterize some expenses, and you've given me some new options here. So what our goal here is to get these software changes out so that you'll be able to, at the end of the year here, recode things and go back and say, I may have used this set of function codes or this object or what have you. I want to relook at my equipment spending, for instance, or something else, and you can do those changes once the state software is updated. Because the first report that we will have that will be on the report card and, kind of this big, and I'll talk more about this in a second, but, the data will actually be used from fiscal year 13. So if you want to, you can go back and recode those things. And then Lana's going to talk for you a second about here this account change for redoing your history.
All right, so some of you are probably going to say, you know what, I want to take care of some of the things this year because I can, like moving all of your parapros, attendant aides, classroom aides, moving them over to instruction. You can do that this year yet because the codes are all out there. Nothing's going to change. It would help you get that cleaned up. It makes sense. So what you have to remember is if you're on state software, you want to use account change to do that because that will carry your history over with you. And most of the ITC sites have 2, 3, 4 years maybe of history that's current history so that when you run that, it will change all the current history. But remember that anything that's beyond 3 to 4 years, that's, you have to go into history to look at the files, they may not change. But it will change all your history and bring all that over with it. It will also change pay codes, purchase order codes, all those type of things that are pertinent to what you're doing now. It will change all those so that you won't have to worry about what else you have to change. So it's a really important piece to remember when you're changing these codes.
So going forward, what we will have is not the EFM anymore as it currently exists. We are going to be reporting on both this high-level classroom, non-classroom, and we will be reporting on each of these 20 or so categories that follow the federal categories. So it's kind of a super EFM. It's just more split out than the 5 that we've had before.
But it just won't be by building.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, about the building level, the law talks about district level, or community schools as well, and their district and building is the same thing. So for them, So anyway, we've been really focusing on the district level. Just as EFM does a building level, we will do a building level as well. I'm not sure. I mean, that's second priority for us. First thing that we have to do is the district level stuff. So I'm purposely not giving a date for when we'll be able to have the report. It may not be the first year, yeah, for the building stuff, but we will have building level EFM, new super EFM reports. Okay, so before I'm going to talk to you now about what you will do, I need to tell you for just a couple minutes here about what we at Department of Ed have to do. So the products that we develop, we have to, for every school district, show what the percent classroom instructional spending is out of your counted, non-excluded spending. So, a school district that has, say, we go through this and we say, things that aren't excluded total $10 million, and out of that, $77 million is classroom instructional. So for that district, 70% of their current spending is classroom instructional. That's the percent that we have. That's the product. And we then will have that same percent for every other district. So this district has 68% classroom instructional, this other one has 62%, somebody else is 79%, whatever, and so we'll have that. The other thing that we'll have is an overall per pupil expense. So, again, one district might be $8,000, one district $10,000, one district $12,000, but we'll have that overall per pupil. So those two numbers, the percent and the per pupil expenditure. Then with that data, we then have to group and rank within each group. So, for instance, you have your large traditional schools. They will be compared against each other. So you have, say, 100 of those on that list. We'll have a list, and number one will say, the highest percent classroom instructional is at 79%, for instance, and that's going to be number one on the list. Number two has 78%. Number three, et cetera. We'll just go down the list. And then we also do that ranking for overall expenditure per pupil. We'll do not only within each group, but we have to do a master list. So out of all the districts in the state, here's the per pupil expenditure, starting at one end of lowest and then go to the highest.
There will be some delineation in the groups then as to what size you're looking at, right? So if it's 14,000 ADM down to 10,000 ADM would be one group. Will there be a chart that delineates that so you know what group you've been in?
There will be.
Okay.
Yes. It's essentially by enrollment.
Right, I figured that.
The law says the delineation, the groupings are by enrollment, and the same for community schools. They're grouped by enrollment, and then joint vocational schools as well. So we'll have averages for each group and statewide averages, this kind of odd operating expenditures as a percentage of the total. So, for instance, somebody with very little capital or other excluded type expenses might have, 95% of their spending is operating, and somebody else might have 70% or whatever. So then what do we do with all this data? All this data will be on the online local report card. That's a whole other topic. There's a lot of changes to the local report card. But on that report card, there will be some of this data that we have to report on expenditure per pupil and percent classroom instruction. We also post not just that really high level, but this sort of new EFM category data. Put that on our website. There are products that we have, like through the interactive local report card, through the fiscal benchmark, through the EFM reports. That those will continue, and we'll have a lot of use for this data in different places on our website. We will also produce a report for each school. So, not just the one master list, but each school will have some of these, the particular data to that school with their percentages and dollar amounts and compare it to averages overall and averages within the group. So that's what we have to do. So next steps here. One thing that we are doing is we are making available draft FY12 district results. for the calculations that we have to make. So this is not going to be on any report card. This will not end up being on the website. This is not things, this is sort of, because the actual reporting starts with FY13 data. So the FY12 is just to do sort of a dry run, because we already have the FY12 data that you've all given us from year-end last year. And we are calculating it through our new filters here. Now, it's a little bit different, because obviously the new crosswalk we have is one that uses the new codes. And so we have a slightly modified version of this, the crosswalk that uses the current codes. So, it's not exactly right, but it's pretty close. So we will have that and have it available through your ITC that you'll be able to go in and look at your results. You won't be able to look at anyone else's, but, nobody else will be able to look at yours, so that's a good. So you can look at that, and we'll also include some averages there. And so, the purpose of all that is so that you can see what categories your stuff rolls up into, and you'll be able to see if something looks funny. So if you're like, I'm looking at this, and I have this enormous expense in one area, and, why is that? I'll tell you, most of the data, when we've looked at it so far with traditional schools, seems to be pretty much within the realm of what seems possible or probable. The problem that we've had is more some of the community school data looks on the face of it to be obviously wrong, where something is reported as 100% of the spending for that community school is administrative, which can't be right. So anyway, so you'll get that. We'll send that out. We were really hoping to have that out this week. We're working hard with our data people on that. So we're doing the webinars. Actually, we got this slide wrong slightly. So what you'll have to do is, just like you normally do, complete the FY13 and report at the year end, your period N and period H. We should have said that.
N is the student data for the ADM, and H is your financial data.
Yeah, so just like you normally do, you turn that in, and the timeline this year will be the same timeline as we've had in the past. So round about July 1st, that will open up. You'll be able to start submitting. That will close round about the end of September. So just as per usual, you'll have to report during that time period. We are thinking in the future we will shorten that window. The trouble with that window is it doesn't allow us to do our calculations before the printing of the local report card. So as you can see, what we have here, we probably won't get our stuff done until November 1st. So it will be on the report card. It'll just be a late addition to the report card. But we didn't want to do all these changes and move up the submission date this year. So look to future years for that. I had a couple questions here. So the new USAS manual, when will that be available? It is not available now. I just talked to the Auditor of State's office yesterday. Everything that we have been working on, I think, is done now. They're just going through their review process of having multiple sets of eyes look at it for any, small technical corrections to make. So I think it is imminent, and when that is out and ready, we will put it on our website and notify all of you as well. The ranking reporting does start this fall. So, this is not something that a lot of people wanted. OASBO, for instance, was pretty active in trying to get a legislative change to say, what would be a great timeline is if we did all this, implemented the new changes for FY14, and then at the end of FY14, we'd start reporting on it. That did not win out. That's not what the law said in the end. So we have to use this and report on FY13 data that will be part of the report card this fall. And where can the charts be found? That is, if you go onto our website, which is all about to change, but currently under the Finance tab, if you click on Finance and then there's Expenditure Rankings, or you can just go to the search feature of our website, type in expenditure rankings, and page that has all this data on it, the links on it should show up as well.
There's some about the, I was going to say, if you have a minute, there was somebody asked about the ESCs. And are they going to be included?
Okay.
Well, one of the recurring questions is, how will this affect maintenance of effort because of the historical data? So if you can address that one.
Okay, maintenance of effort. If you correctly move your attendant aides and your special education aides into the 1230s and 1240s, and all the 2180s for the OTPT, all of those will remain to count. So they're going to count the 1230s, 1240s, all of your 2180s for the support services, as well as 2416s and all those that remain as is that don't change. You'll be fine. That should not be a problem. But the key is making sure that everything is special ed instruction is coded to a 1230 or a 1240. Again, I mean, it's what we've had to do, and that's what we are going to continue to do.
We had a question here about ESCs. There are no report cards for ESCs, and the per pupil and all that EFM, any of this reporting will not be done for ESCs. So we are talking about traditional school districts, JVSs, and community schools that will get this reporting and data out and on the report card. And I'm sorry, we are just about at the end here of 10:31. We have some more questions. Just as we had in the last couple webinars, there were a lot of good questions. We will work on a Q&A document. So if it's one that either we have here and just haven't answered, some of the ones that we have answered, we will repeat. Also, Londa and Sonia and myself have gotten emails after the fact and a lot of good questions and clarifications. So we will keep a list of that, and we will have an updated Q&A document that will be available on our website. So we're at the end here. I want to thank everyone for their participation today. A lot of good questions. I know it's a change. I know this is something that rocks all of our world a bit, but appreciate everyone's diligence and trying to do this right, and we'll do some good reporting. So thanks for your attention today, and good luck.